Let's Talk is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to Let's Talk, episode 60, brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network. Howdy all, Father Corey Stika. Welcome to Let's Talk, our weekly SQPN community podcast. Special thanks to Dom for taking over last week. I was on retreat, and a very much needed retreat and a very restful retreat. I enjoyed it, although you might be able to hear my voice picked up a little bit of a cold as part of it. But thanks to Dom, did a great job. It was a very interesting discussion on the Civil War, so I appreciate his work there. This week I got a couple of returning panelists. First of all, speaking of Dom, Dom's mother-in-law, Pat, is back. How are you doing, Pat?
Pretty good. Greetings.
And then Father Michael from Ohio is also here. How's it going, Father Michael?
Very good. Good to be back.
Well, it's good to have you back. Good to have you both back. And we got a kind of an interesting discussion of a topic that dropped just actually while I was on retreat. This particular thing kind of became well known over the past week and noticed. So the Pew Research is one of these research organizations we hear about a lot. They do a lot of really good research, especially about like popular culture and our what we understand about different things within our culture. Religion is a big one they actually deal with quite a bit. And they recently released a survey about what Americans know about religion. And it was about all religions. So it was Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Sikhism and Hinduism and Zoroastrianism and atheism. And it was this big survey where they asked a bunch of different questions about different facts. You know, what is an atheist? You know, someone who believes in God, someone who doesn't believe in God, is unsure whether God exists, and so on. All kinds of different questions. Well, one question they asked in particular kind of made us Catholics kind of perk up our ears a little bit. They basically asked, you know, what is communion? You know, let's see if I can find the exact question here. But basically they asked, what is communion? Is communion either, is it either the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, or it is a symbol of the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ? And 2/3 of Catholics, more than 2/3 of Catholics, said it is a symbol. Now, Father Michael, we know that's not right. What does the church actually teach about the Eucharist?
Well, the opposite. Just that at the Mass, the bread and wine do become the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. Obviously not in a way that looks like flesh and blood. We would say that the substance changes, while the accidents, like the outside appearance of bread and wine, stay the same. What it truly is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ that he, at the Last Supper, gave to his apostles. And John 6, he talked about eating my flesh and drinking my blood. This is what it's all about for us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you talk about the accents, yes, it tastes like bread and wine. It looks like bread and wine. It smells like bread and wine, but it's no longer bread and wine. And that's why we need to be careful with that language sometimes, I think. But so it's a little disturbing that the 2/3 of the Catholic, and actually the number they give is 69% of Catholics. So almost 7 out of 10 believe that bread and wine are just symbols. Now, of course, in Catholic theology, we make a distinction between the real presence and a symbol. Symbol represents something, but is not actually it. As I understand it, this would almost be closer to Lutheran or Methodist teachings on communion than what the Catholic Church teaches. But what do you think, Pat, about this, what you read in this survey?
Well, it was shocking. I've got the report up in front of me. At least it showed that the people who were attending Mass on a regular basis, there were 63% that believed it was the body and blood.
Correct.
But the people, as they came less frequently, yes, the percentages went way up. And that was shocking to me because I came up through Catholic school.
Sure.
And we were converts and went through Catholic, grade school, high school. And this was just something I just was not expecting to see in the report.
Well, it's interesting, too, because sometimes the Pew Research has gotten some criticism from Catholics because they will say frequent mass goers and say a month or more, once a month or more frequent. And we would say, no, that's not frequent, once a week. Well, in this survey, they actually did ask, U.S. Catholics how often they go to Mass, and it was attend Mass weekly or more. So this is your every week or daily Mass goers. And it's like you said, Pat, 63%. But it's really interesting where then they have monthly or yearly. So this is, your more occasional Catholics, and the numbers flip. It's only 25% believe that the bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ. Only 25%, 75% believe it's a symbol. And then those who are seldom or never, these are the people, they might come for a wedding, they might come for a funeral, they might come once in a while for Christmas when they're home visiting. Only 13% believe that's the body and blood of Christ. And it's interesting too. You look through all the different statistics, and by and large, once you get out of that breakout, they're all pretty similar. Men and women are fairly similar within about 3 points. White versus Hispanic is about 10-point difference. Age groups, those who are 60 or older tend to believe more than those who are my age or younger. 40 to 59 demographic or 40 and under. High school, actually education really isn't a huge difference either. It's just the biggest difference is how often they go to Mass. And I know the bishops are scratching their head. My bishop has already expressed concern about this publicly, that we need to do more to fix this problem. And, obviously we're not going to fix this problem. But Father Michael, is this something that you've seen in your ministry? Do these stats sound like anything you've seen?
I guess it's not surprising in the sense that, and I was just thinking, which is the cause that they believe it because they go to Mass, or they don't go to Mass because they don't believe it. And I would say that's a big part of it, is just looking at why do people come to Mass or why do people not come to Mass? That do they not come because they don't think anything special happens there? And I would think that'd be a strong indicator. Steubenville is a very Catholic area, and I'm really blessed. I'm a high school chaplain of the local Catholic school, and it feels like they really believe. And I think if I ask them, a lot of the kids would be able to say, like, this is what the church actually teaches.
Right.
But I think we just look out into the world and look at Mass attendance in general, and we look at just how people participate. The fact that a frequent Mass goer in other studies could be considered monthly. Just that there's a sign that there's a loss of faith, and a loss, maybe not even a faith, of just understanding, because I always say, and I think it's true, if you understood what is going on at the Mass, you'd be there. If you really believed that, or really, really saw that clearly.
Exactly. It would be interesting. I know this survey didn't focus on that. These were more the demographics, the Mass attendance stuff. But I wish they would also have published the percentages of the demographics, to say at least, and maybe if you read the full survey, because of course what we have is they call it their fact tank, which is kind of a summary. They take the numbers and they kind of explain them. And they do a very good job, by the way. This little article, which we'll put in the show notes, does a great job of kind of explaining what happened and why, what they found and why. But it would be interesting to see how many they interviewed are actually, regular Mass goers, once a week or more frequent, how many are monthly to yearly, and how many are rarely, if ever. It would be a very interesting conversation to have, to say the least, to see that. And they also break it down into, how many actually know the church teaching on transubstantiation. And of course, for those who aren't aware or don't remember from their religious education, that's the technical term that we use as Catholics to describe that process of the bread and wine becoming the body and blood of Christ. When our priests, Father Michael, myself, and other priests stand there and say, "This is my body, this is my blood," over the bread and the wine, that's the moment. That's what happens. That transubstantiation. That's St. Thomas Aquinas gave us that term, and we haven't figured out a better one to use, so we're sticking with it. But
yeah, I do remember a quote from a convert, and I don't remember, I should have looked it up before, but something about he didn't understand why more people in the Catholic Church didn't go to Mass daily even. Mm-hmm. He said, because if you really believe that this is the body and blood of Christ, then you should be there on your knees every day, because This is just such a miraculous thing. And I've always remembered that, and so that's. But I don't remember who it was that was the person who was quoted saying that most.
Yeah, I remember hearing something like that as well, where it was like a Protestant minister said, "If I truly believed what you say you believe, I would I'd be on my knees in front of the tabernacle, and they'd have to drag me away, basically."
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I think even beyond just in the study, the kind of the shock of like how many people really believe and who don't is kind of the confusion. And like you just mentioned, Father, that thinking they do believe what the church believes and seeing communion as symbolic and being unsure about it. I think that's maybe even a deeper problem, that people aren't sure. And maybe that says something about how we're preaching it, how it's being taught, that people just aren't sure what the church actually says.
Well, go ahead, Beth.
Well, I was going to say, and that really brings up that I hear a lot when there's a wedding mass or a funeral mass, and people who aren't Catholic say, "Well, you're being mean to exclude us from going up to communion because this is you're discriminating against us." And again, if you truly believe that this is the body and blood of Christ, to have somebody go up just to say, "Yeah, I'd like to share in it," then that's not meaningful. It's like they don't know what they're asking. They haven't affirmed that they believe, and that's what communion really is.
Well, I think we see a lot of that even among our regular Mass goers, where everybody comes up to communion, but we know they haven't all been to confession. And as much as we hope that our Catholics are, we're all good people living according to the gospel, we're also sinners in need of God's forgiveness. And, unfortunately, not every Catholic is in that state of grace when they come forward to communion, but they've been encouraged. Everybody needs to come forward, and receive.
I think it can be a tough thing because we really do want to encourage people to receive. Like, look at this amazing thing. Don't you want to participate in this? Yeah. But just the fact that it requires something of us, that can be really challenging for a lot of people, because I think, and you see it, I don't know, at like RCIA time, when people coming to the church thinking maybe it's just as simple as signing up, and I come in and I'm Catholic now because I want to be, but just that being Catholic, saying amen up there to receive the Eucharist requires that our lives are different, and that can be really hard in a society that's afraid of commitment to commit in that way.
Well, exactly.
Well, and I remember too some discussion among families that the mom and the dad would be taking them to church, and maybe the kid wasn't really truly in a state that they should be, but because everybody's going up, they would go up too. And I remember that being a scandal at some point when I was in high school, that we were told, don't ever do that. If find some way to say, "Oh, I can't." But even don't let embarrassment force you into going up when you're not in a state of grace.
Well, the idea of this comes from St. Paul. That if we are not in the state of grace, if we are in the state of mortal sin, he warns us that if we do not receive our Lord worthily, which the church has understood to mean in the state of grace, in God's good standing, if you will, because we do not have mortal sin on our soul, if you do not do that, if you are doing it when you're unworthy, we are eating the body and blood to condemnation is the phrase that St. Paul uses. That, I mean, it's that serious of a matter. And that communion is that serious of a matter because, again, we are receiving the body and blood. And by the way, that's in the passage where St. Paul reminds us of what happened at the Last Supper to institute the Eucharist. You know, he tells the story of our Lord taking the bread, taking the wine, saying those words, and, you know, instituting the Eucharist. That's where that passage comes from. But we don't hear that, you know, and so people don't think about it. Well,
and the passage where all the people leave and turn away because if they had really thought it was symbolic, it wouldn't have been a problem. Yeah. But they understood he meant it literally. He meant it. And so they couldn't handle it. And so when people are reading the Bible and they think it's symbolic, that passage should, you know, clue them into, no, it's not just symbolic.
Right.
But I don't know what, for instance, the other Bibles, how do they portray that aren't the Catholic versions? Do they mince those words? I don't know.
I'm not sure off the top of my head either. I don't think they do. I just think they explain it differently, shall we say. The denominations do. You know, because, of course, they're Bible only except for their human traditions that they add to the Bible. Sorry, that could be a whole nother topic of discussion.
Either way, it's the Catholics who are not understanding this, sadly. There was
I do have pardon me.
Oh, I'm sorry. There was a commentary on this that Chad Pecknold wrote that I read today, and he said, just preaching what St. Cyril of Alexandria taught, that the Eucharist is divine fire, mistreated and it will burn you. And I thought that was a really powerful image that when we're taking communion, it's so beyond what we even understand. And like if we do it unworthily, that's dangerous for us. Right. When we do it worthily, it should be transforming us. But just that missing the significance of what's happening, that God's present there, I think is just something that we're not used to, or in our culture, a lot of people are not used to.
Right. Well, I know that's one, like I said, the bishops are noticing, they've seen this survey, and I think it scared a bunch of them. I think it rocked them back, you know, and they don't know what to do with it. And of course, you know, the answer you always see is, well, we got to catechize better. And don't get me wrong, I'm a strong advocate to better catechesis, better catechetical programs, better catechetical resources. But I don't know about you two, but I don't think that's the be all and end all. I think that needs to be a part of the discussion, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. What do you think, Father Michael?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think that's sort of the solution we always go to, is like, we just need to teach people more. And like you said, that's definitely true. And preaching the Eucharist and just being clear about it in Catholic schools and in religious education in our parishes is really important. To me, I think it's a big part of how we treat it, and taking it seriously in the liturgy, I think, for me, it seems like is a big part of reinforcing what we believe, that is Mass special? Is it right. a significant time in our week? Is it more than just getting together and being comfortable, but are we recognizing that God is coming there? And I think the other part that always comes back to me is Eucharistic adoration. I think it really goes hand in hand, that when people take that time to pray before the Eucharist, it reinforces just what's happening at the Mass when we receive communion. And I've just seen that in my ministry, that Eucharist adoration leads to deeper faith. And I think that for people who are taking that time to be with the Eucharist, they're really going to believe in the Eucharist.
Absolutely. How about you, Pat? What do you think?
Well, when people talk about we need more catechesis, the assumption that I hear is, oh, that means the schools, that means the RCIA, et cetera. But you said, and I agree, it should also be a part of the sermon of the, there should be more emphasis on this, and maybe this will wake people up. For a while, it's been kind of well, don't say anything up on the pulpit that somebody could take offense at. And, I don't know where this came from, but probably sometime after Vatican II. But that the emphasis went away from it being a sacrifice to being a meal, more like what's talked about in Protestant circles. And I think that language is what has brought us to a lot of misunderstanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know I'll step on some liturgical toes, but I sincerely think, not just with language, how we express what it is. Yes, because it is a sacrificial meal, and the church has always said that and has always understood it as that. But the focus became on the meal aspect and not on the sacrifice. The table,
not the altar.
Correct. Yeah, people talk about the table. They'll talk about distributing the bread and the wine versus the body and blood. And I always correct people. They'll say, "Well, I'll take the wine." No, you'll have the chalice. It's a very different understanding. It's not wine in that point. There is no wine on that altar at that point when it's being distributed. There shouldn't be anyways.
Right.
But that'd be a whole nother issue if there still was. But also I would argue some of the liturgical practices that have arisen since the Second Vatican Council, how we treat the Eucharist, both in and outside of Mass. Eucharistic adoration obviously is a big part of that. That we come into the church and we spend time in prayer before our Lord. That's a big part of it. How we recognize the importance of the sacristy, how we recognize the importance of the tabernacle. That's one of those things that I've railed against as a priest, is tabernacles that were moved either to the side, where they're out of the center focus, or worse yet, put in another room altogether. And yes, there are cases like, the National Shrine, or the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. is one example I could think of where that is as much a tourist site as it is a church. And yes, so that's a place where it is important to have a Eucharistic chapel, and they have a beautiful Eucharistic chapel there. And so that's perfect. That's fine. Your average parish church is not a tourist site. It should be a place where people come to the church to pray before the tabernacle, and the tabernacle should be at the center of our view. Now, I know liturgists, if there's any liturgists listening right now, I'm sorry. I'm not worried about if you think I'm right or wrong, because I think you're wrong, because there are liturgists who that they think this is vital. People get confused. No, they're getting confused because you're not making it a center of attention. We could talk about some of the real hot issues. Should Mass be celebrated facing the people or facing with the people? Note I didn't say turning my back on the people, facing with the people. There's other, the use of sacred language, the use of chant. So much we do at Mass speaks to the importance of the Eucharist. And some of that has been watered down since the 70s. And it does depend sometimes on the celebrant. I'm sure Father Michael, Pat, you both know priests where they're pretty loosey-goosey with the words of the Mass.
Oh, and traveling, it's always a turkey shoot when we go traveling. Is this going to be a parish I'm going to feel like I really went to Mass, or am I going to come out of here mad? And that's a problem. Yeah, it really bothers me and my daughters too, because they're very faithful Catholics. When they walk in and they can't even find where to bow to, where to genuflect to, because it is just not obvious where the tabernacle is. And it's a real serious issue.
I think the reality of all this gets shown in before Mass and after Mass, how people act in church. And I'm not trying to speak specifically to my parish in case anybody's listening, but I've seen it all over. It's just a big room at that point where we talk and laugh loud, and maybe people are praying, but either way, like I think just how you treat the church building, because the Eucharist is there, is really significant. Something else, and again, this could be really hot button, is extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. And I'm not trying to put down any single one of them. Thank you for your service. But just the idea that something changed where this was a job for a priest and that anybody could do it. And in certain occasions, that's really necessary. You need help. But just, I think when we let it run and don't be careful with it, that it can take away the significance of what's happening. And I think that we've seen the results of that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's another. They're meant to be for extraordinary circumstances. I'll talk about this parish. So you talk about how we treat the building itself. When we come into the presence of Jesus, and here the tabernacle's always been in the center. I've never had to worry about that. It's always been present right at the back wall on the old high altar, and we would do funeral wakes. Or like pray the rosary, and then people would talk and do a typical wakes. Where people would visit and talk about the person. And when I first got here, they would do it in the church. Not in the parish hall, not in some other place, in the church itself, in front of the tabernacle. And it only took hearing a couple of stories that were not, first of all, should never have been told in public, but then to be told in front of the Blessed Sacrament, in front of Jesus himself sitting there. It's like, no, that's done. Now we do it over at the funeral home. That's just not happening ever again. And it's people came there, and most of the people weren't even Catholic, because of course the majority of people in my area aren't Catholic. So they had no idea, but the Catholics even were the ones telling the stories. So, basically, there's a lot of stuff that's going to have to change, and we're going to have, hopefully our bishops are going to have that discussion. They're going to talk about these kind of issues. Ultimately, would both of you say that basically we need to live like we actually believe it?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's really it. Just that we may say things, but we really have to live as if we believe Jesus is really in that tabernacle. And I think, as you mentioned, Father, this coming from the bishops would be the real solution. Because, as Pat said, there might be a great parish where it's very respectful and you're happy to be there for Mass, and then maybe a not so great parish. But it can't all be just in the hands of individual priests and individual parishes. We need to have that teaching for all of us.
Right.
Yeah, and that should include things like, there should not be just idle chatter before Mass. If somebody has to reach over and say something to help somebody find something or whatever, that's one thing. But I know on our Sunday Masses, typically we have a rosary that's prayed before Mass on all of our Sunday Masses. So that's already getting people kind of into that spirit of prayer. Right. But then when the rosary stops, there are some people that as they're walking in, they keep on talking. But I think this, like there should be, minimal type of talking before Mass. There should be a lot of things that should be coming from, as you say, from the bishops in a teaching letter.
Right. That
then all the priests are reading or is proclaimed at various Masses. And often, not just once a year. I think this should be repeated and talk about this a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that has always kind of upset me a little bit is when you look at the Feast of Corpus Christi, the body and blood of Christ. Every year we celebrate, we have one day right after the Easter season where we celebrate the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ. And there's that reading from St. Paul I was talking about earlier. But the section on receiving our Lord unworthily was purposely cut out of it.
Ooh.
Because you look at the passage, it goes right up to that point and then skips about 10 verses. And of course, those 10 verses are the ones where St. Paul is talking about receiving unworthily and how the community was doing that. And now they're having illnesses and all these other things. And then it goes to the last part of that chapter.
And it's not an optional that you could include that? No, you can't.
You cannot.
At that
It
point.
is cut out completely. So what I've gotten the habit of doing actually every year as part of my homily, I start out by reading those verses.
It's a good idea.
That's a good idea.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
but that needs to be restored to the sacramentary, because if you look, or the lectionary, because if you look at the extraordinary form, the Mass before 1970, it was there and was read a couple of times during the year. Now we only have it once a year, and that section is out. So that would be another thing, you know, if any bishops, including my own, you know, if any bishops are listening and they can do some poll, that needs to be restored now. You know, that we need to do what we can to get that kind of thing back. And
That's one of those committee meetings I would love to have sat in on, just to hear what was the thinking behind that.
Yeah, exactly.
What were you thinking?
Yeah. And I'm sure they wanted to make a more positive approach on the Eucharist and everything, but it's like, but people also need to understand this is a very serious issue. And that's why we're so concerned about this survey, why we've taken so much, why we're taking the time to talk about it and what we think can be done. Of course, we don't have all the answers, you know, and ultimately, ultimately it comes down to each of us as individuals, but also as a church. We need to be looking at what are we doing as a church to foster better understanding of the Eucharist.
I feel like the answer, I think it was Mother Teresa, somebody asked her, like, what would you change in the church, or what's wrong with the church? And she said me. And I think that's always a first answer, is that if we want to really take the Eucharist seriously, we have to take the Eucharist seriously, and just be praying before the Eucharist, especially in adoration, be going to confession to prepare for communion. And so that's up to all of us. And I think that's always a first step.
So, Pat, is there anything else you'd like to kind of close out with? Either of you, actually. I'll just kind of.
No, I just hope that we can find more of an emphasis on what the true meaning is in the next few years before people just totally stop coming to church, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Michael, anything?
For me, there's a book, Insinu Jesu, that's very popular right now by an anonymous Benedictine monk, and
Sure.
it very much ties into a priest's devotion to the Eucharist. But I think for anybody, just that idea that the Lord's inviting us to something really special and powerful and intimate. And this isn't just about, following the rules of the church. It's about that Jesus is inviting you to something. And so anything that leads to that, I would encourage.
Well, very good. And some great thoughts. And obviously, we want to hear from our listeners what you think of about this as well. This is a discussion not just between the three of us, but we also want to hear what you think. So send us feedback. We really would like to continue this discussion on Let's Talk. So please do that. Well, this time we're going to take a quick break and do our and thank all of you for listening to Let's Talk. We really appreciate our listeners, and we hope you enjoy our topics that we bring up. They make you think, or bring, entertain, or just something you enjoy listening to. And if you do, please do share our shows. We hope, we want people to listen to our shows, and so you can help do that by sharing them on, Facebook and YouTube and so on. Also, you can comment on both SQPN's site on Facebook, as well as our YouTube show that gets uploaded, so that you can let us know what you think and share with others. I hope you're also checking out our other shows. We got lots of great shows. SQPN has really been growing over the last year. And so we got lots of great stuff. We got the American Catholic history. We've got the Secrets of Disney just started up. Of course, we've had Secrets of Doctor Who, Secrets of Star Trek going for a while. Dom's own show, Raising the Bets. That's a great one. Catholics of Oz, another great one. So I hope you're checking all those out, checking out everything we've got, and again, sharing them with others, because we have been adding so many more shows, which is a good thing. It's also kind of stretched SQPN's financial resources quite a bit. We're not quite meeting our goal. Of course, we have our Patreon campaign, which we're very grateful for those who are giving to Patreon. In fact, I'd like to thank at this moment Joseph F., Ronald S., Austin T., Christopher K., and Janelyn M. Thank you, and all of our Patreons, for your support. You really do help us keep these shows going. And I'd like to encourage others, if you aren't giving, please do give. We are having a little bit of financial difficulty right now. We are kind of having to dip into our reserve because we're not able to make our monthly expenses at this moment. And, if you're not giving, please do consider giving at our Patreon campaign, sqpn.com/give. Also, those who are giving from Patreon, would you consider giving just a little bit more, maybe going to another tier or giving another couple of bucks a month to help us out? It is very much greatly appreciated, all your support, but we're having a little difficulty. And unfortunately, if we don't reach our goals or reach our budget, we might have to cut back on some of our shows. We really don't want to do that. We enjoy making them and we enjoy putting them out for you. And we know you enjoy listening to them. And our numbers are going up, so we know people are listening to them. So please do consider giving as you can at sqpn.com/give. All right. Well, let's move on to our picks of the week. So, Pat, would you like to go first with our picks?
Well, our parish subscribes to something called Formed, FORMED.
Yep.
And I even have had a couple of people that aren't in my parish ask me about something, and I was able to, tell them about that resource. But I don't know if all parishes, what the commitment is that they have to do. But if your parish does subscribe to that, or a neighboring parish where you've got a friend, there are so many good books and movies and very valuable audio books that are part of that are good, solid Catholic, information and inspiration. So that's what I would recommend this week.
Form's awesome. We use it as well, and it's fantastic. Father Michael.
So following up on what we talked about, Bishop Barron put together a website in response to this Pew study. And so if you go to wordonfire.org/presence, it's a collection of all his videos, homilies, articles, podcasts on the Eucharist. And so Bishop Barron is a great teacher, and he just went right into responding to this. So wordonfire.org/presence, as in the real presence.
Excellent. You have to check that out. It's going to be good stuff. Maybe I'm a little biased because I did have him as a professor at Mundelein before he was bishop. Nice. So yeah, it's a little biased.
But it also reminds me of Scott Hahn has had a couple of books out on, with the Eucharist as being the main topic. And I sure have enjoyed his books. Yeah,
he's another good one for resources on that. So for my pick, speaking of the Eucharist, kind of continuing the theme, last week as part of the retreat, we were doing, it was like a Eucharistic retreat, actually, Eucharist conference, where we also, St. Joseph and Eucharist conference, so of course the two go together. You got to have St. Joseph as well. And as part of it, we would have solemn high Latin extraordinary form masses. So we have the whole bells and whistles and the chant and the whole works. It was beautiful. Well, one thing you find anytime you go to an extraordinary form mass in the United States are the red books. And anybody who's gone to one know these red books. They're produced by the Coalition for Ecclesia Dei out of Chicago. And they're Latin English texts that show the text of the Mass, the ordinary of the Mass, so that you can follow along as the Mass is going on. And if you're ever interested in the extraordinary form, if you want to learn more about the extraordinary form, these are how you do it. They're great books. They're not expensive. You can get them for as little as $5, $7 a copy for one, and they go cheaper as you order by bulk. Very much worth it. And of course, they don't just have Latin and English. They also have Latin and Spanish. They have the wedding Mass, both in English and Spanish. They got funeral Mass. They got all kinds of other resources about it, including how to train servers to be extraordinary form servers. I'm getting ready to start doing the extraordinary form once a week here in my parish on Saturday mornings. And so I ordered that book so that I could get those trained as well, so that I can get a couple of kids trained up in it. But if you're interested in all, and the nice thing about the extraordinary form is once you learn it, you do develop a greater appreciation for the Eucharist, because it's so focused on Christ, and it's so clearly focused on him. And so, yeah, my pick is definitely those little red books. You've seen them. Those who go to the extraordinary form Mass love them because they're so clear to help understand the extraordinary form. Well, Pat, thank you very much for joining. Where can people find you?
Well, I have a website, themamanerd.com. the-mama-nerd.com, the-mama-nerd.com. But I spend more time on Facebook with my own page there called The Mama Nerd. Also spelled the same way, the-mama-nerd. And that's where I am.
Excellent. And Father Michael?
I'm on Twitter at FR Mike Gossett, Father Mike Gossett, and frmichaelg.com.
Excellent. I'm Father Corey Stika. You can find me at frcorey.org, where I post my homilies. My Facebook page is Father Corey Stika, and my Twitter handle is frcorey-stika. Once again, if you would like to send us feedback, please do. You can leave it at the SQPN Facebook page, on our YouTube, the YouTube post for this episode, or send it to letstalk@sqpn.com. Thank you much for listening, and God bless.